Have you been searching the internet for possibly years now, trying to find strategies and techniques to overcome fear? I'm sure you have. Many of us have in the past and even present day, because fear is such a huge subject and everyone's always talking about it and wondering how to get through it, how to overcome it, how to master fear, really conquer your fear. And really, what I'm here today to do is to deconstruct fear and to really give you a practical, comprehensive understanding of fear, but most importantly, practical applications with which you can work with fear instead of just reading articles or self-help books that talk about fear and really positive thinking, believing in, the next right action, the next right step, which are really helpful things, but really don't get you anywhere at all. So when it comes to fear, the first thing that's really important that you know that fear is actually a physiological, or it's a body response that you have. Now, we really identify with racing thoughts and, tumultuous thinking and lots of aversive emotions, overwhelm, stress, anxiety, all of these things. But really the emotional response and the cognitive or mental response that we have is really just in relation and a cause of the somatic or body response that we have. And so it's so important, and we'll get to this later, that in understanding and working fear, that you understand it's a part of your ANS, or autonomic nervous system. And there is a biological point to having fear. There's an evolutionary point to having fear. And the reason is that hundreds of millions of years ago, we had to outrun predators. We had to, be safe. We had to live in caves. We had to do all these things, and fear and worry and these types of experiences were vitally important to survival. So we are wired at times, and I want you to hear this when I say at times very appropriately, to have fear. But what so many of you guys struggle with is fear around things that you can't control, fear around how, you're going to be perceived or what people think of you, fear around your choices, fear around a possible upcoming conversation or event that you have to be in, fear of big things like, not getting married or getting married, having children, not having a support system or a community of like-minded people, of death. I mean, we have fears of all different kinds of things. But again, really today, what I want is for you to have an understanding of what fear is, and then really some practical applications of how you can work with that fear. So, it's a biological response, and we have sensations actually from your senses that we feel, many of us actually unconsciously. And those sensations cue an emotional experience and a cognitive or mental experience, which is what many of us identify with. So when you think of being scared, and I ask people, how do you know that you're afraid, for example? Many people will say things, my mind starts racing, it's freaking out. I feel such stress and overwhelm, all of these things. But most people don't really dial into the fact that they're having a bodily experience around fear, which actually started everything. And I'm going to get to this, but if we can begin to decouple, take apart the bodily sensation or sensations that are happening from the emotional and mental constructs that you're experiencing, we can begin to reduce and even eliminate our fear. So some of the biggest questions that I thought I would bring into today's discussion, that I get all of the time from people on feedback from videos and questions on YouTube and Instagram and all different kinds of places, I thought would be helpful to go into, because they all align with this subject and are things that you probably want to know as well. So, one of the first things that I get a lot is, why am I so fearful? Why am I scared of everything? I mean, I know intellectually I don't need to be as scared of this conversation or this event or this thing that happened in the past that I'm worried about, but I feel like I'm always scared all of the time. And although, in our bodies, we respond with the autonomic nervous system all actually identically the same mechanisms of action happen in the ANS, the fears, the unique fears that you have are different from someone else's fears, or your friend fears, or a parent's fears, because your fears are unique to you and your history. So there's a really important thing that happens when we're 0 to 4, 0 to 5, and it's called your core conditioning. And when we're this age, we are like sponges. We soak up all of these experiences. We soak up belief systems from primary caregivers, from people perhaps at school or peers or churches, all kinds of things. And we pick up on a lot of worry. We pick up on a lot of fear. We're even, many of us, told to be scared of certain things. And some of them, rightfully so, scared to be crossing the street without looking, scared to not wear your seatbelt. I mean, all of these things. But a lot of the fears that we have that really drive us crazy are fears that we almost soaked up from just being alive. Many of us, and it wasn't on purpose of our primary caregivers, but many of the things that we are core at our fear, scared of, are things that the people that were around us, kind of that system that covered and kept us and nurtured us, we're afraid of as well. You'll even hear things such as, intergenerational fears and fears that are passed down from generations, which is a topic for another time. But this core conditioning and your interpretation, your experience, your perception of people, events, things that are happening to you, your sense of empowerment, your sense of autonomy, your sense of agency, all of these things are really really come into being during those years. And what's so hard is we don't really have a say over a lot of things that happen to us when we're very young. I mean, especially when we're infants and things like that. The fight, flee or attack that you hear a lot around the nervous system. When you think of an infant, for example, when they are really, really afraid, they can't flee. They can't really effectively fight. And so all kinds of things can happen inside an infant's body that's beginning to condition and almost even program them around things that they can't control, around loud noises, around people not being there, around feeling like they aren't worthwhile, aren't even lovable. I mean, these things aren't consciously happening inside an infant's mind, but the effects of them are registering in the body. So all I want to say again is that this period of time in your life was incredibly important. You soaked up all of these things, and your unique fears are from your history. So your interpretation, again, different from mine or a friend or a parent's, is unique to you. You have your unique historical interpretation of what is scary to you and what is not. And that is really important to know. I get asked a lot, how do I overcome fear? How do I work with fear? How do I train myself to get over fear? And when we can begin to understand, even only, intellectually, that fear is a somatic or bodily experience, then it becomes more apparent, more evident to us that in order to work with fear, we're going to have to work with our bodies. So the first step in working with fear is really to first bring awareness, which might sound a little odd to you, that you're actually in a fear response. A lot of people actually aren't aware that they're really quite scared or frightened or even terrified because they're so wrapped up in the thoughts and the emotions that they're having. So it's really important to bring awareness and to practice this kind of reference feeling that you have of, oh my gosh, I'm scared out of my mind, which again might sound scared, but most of us are so caught up. It's almost like going to a movie, like the screen in front of you is all these emotions and thoughts and worst case scenarios, and what's actually happening we aren't really aware of. So really cultivating that awareness is so important. But working with our bodies is really where it's at. And in something very popular these days and highly effective is something called somatic experiencing work or somatic experiencing techniques. And these techniques, and you can look them up, there's a multitude of them, are really about how do I work with my body. And so, some techniques that are incredibly important are actually touch. There is a prime technique in somatic experiencing therapy where people will put their arms and put it by one underarm and one over the arm and squeeze actually very, very tightly. It's important in these really high fear responses that we allow our body to feel us almost like contained, like I'm containing myself in a container. That sense of having boundaries around us is really important. So doing this around our arms, around our legs, around our diaphragms, really with almost not hurting yourself, but intense pressure can be really helpful for creating that sense of container, of being contained. Because when we feel a sense of being contained, we feel much more safety, as opposed to that feeling that when you're scared where you don't feel contained at all. So that's a really, really good one. And now, of course, you've heard of breath all the time, so I'm not going to go into breath. But one of the things that's often overlooked and you might not know about breath is that when you're doing deep diaphragmatic breathing, and again, the way that you know you're doing deep diaphragmatic breathing is putting your hand on your stomach or your belly and feeling it go out when you exhale, right? Everything goes in when you inhale, and then you feel your belly go out when you exhale. But one of the most important things is that your exhale needs to be longer than your inhale. And we often don't hear that. And the reason why is that when your exhale is longer than your inhale, it signals to the brain and to your lungs a sense of safety. Because if you can imagine, if you're running from something or you're really quite scared of something, you're probably taking very hurried, shallow breaths. So when we start exhaling at a longer pace, I'm sorry, let me fix my camera. If we can start exhaling at a longer pace than our inhale, then what happens is, again, we get those signals that safety, safety, safety. And the body begins to pick up on those cues of safety and will begin to calm down somewhat, which is really, really important. If you want to look up, somatic techniques, one thing that's really, really helpful is using through breath the word VOO. Peter Levine, the founder of Somatic Experiencing Therapy, came up with this technique, and it's very, very calming to the nervous system. So you want to inhale for a count of 5 or 6 breaths. And when you exhale, again, a deep diaphragmatic hand on your belly exhale, you want to say the word, and I know I sound really weird because my cat just looked at me, but the more weird you sound, the more guttural it is, the better that it is. And it's a very highly calming. I would do it probably 10 to 15 times. Again, the exhale needs to be longer than the inhale, but that is incredibly calming to the nervous system. So again, as you experiment with some of the somatic work and somatic techniques, just remember that fear begins in the body. And therefore, the only way to actually work with fear, rather than trying to think positive or to-do list or anything that you could be doing that's mental, that's in your head, or trying to calm down your emotions, work with your body. And if you have any interest on going deeper into somatic techniques that work with fear, please let me know in the comments, and I'm happy to do those. A question that I get asked a lot is, why is fighting or trying to overcome fear, why is it so important? Why is it so challenging at times, but yet so worth it? And well, the first thing that I want you to know is that it's entirely possible to not only reduce, but almost maybe really eliminate fear. I know that sounds big, but if you have the techniques to work with fear, not only will you reduce, and again, I'm going to get back to that somatic decoupling I was talking about, which is a huge part of reducing fear, but you can even get to the point where you almost eliminate fear. And when you reduce or eliminate fear, your life will drastically change. I mean, pause and consider for a moment how much fear keeps you small, keeps you stuck, keeps you from taking steps forward, keeps you from taking action steps, keeps you from creating the kind of life that you really want. Fear keeps us in that space. And so much of fear is of the mind. All of those fears that we have, if we do this, or if we strike out and do this, or if we really try to create a life we love, is that it won't work, it's too risky, it's going to be painful. And we listen to those thoughts, we listen to the mind. But imagine what it would be like if you weren't having those thoughts. And on the contrary, imagine what it would be like if you were actually having thoughts that this might work. And I'm excited and I'm feeling in anticipation. I mean, imagine what that would feel like. So to wonder what your life will be like without fear, or wonder if it's worth it to work on fear, I want you to know absolutely yes. If there's one thing that you can master in your life, I want you to know that mastering fear will revolutionize your life more than anything else. It's absolutely worth it, and it's absolutely possible. And finally, another thing that I wanted to add that's kind of part of that somatic experiencing techniques is what I was talking about at the beginning, how your bodily sensations cue all the thoughts and the emotions you're having. So can you imagine if we could begin to decouple that cueing system, and when that sensation or sensations happen, it actually didn't cue this historical emotional response you have that's so overwhelming, or this historical mental kind of fear construct that you get locked and lost in. Imagine if it was just sensations and it didn't cue all of the stuff that makes life so hard. So I want to give you a technique to actually begin to decouple your bodily sensations from the resulting emotional and cognitive experiences that you have, which really keep you stuck and small. So when you notice, again, trying to bring your awareness closer and closer to the fact that you're having fear, because if you aren't aware that something is happening, you cannot work with it. I invite you for, if you can, 60 seconds, but if we have to start out smaller than that, it's okay. If you have to do 15 or 30, that's fine. But when you're in a space where you feel highly afraid And you're safe, of course. Don't do this when you're driving. Don't do this when you're alone at night. I mean, when you're safe in your house and you feel a sense of safety, of security. I want you to close your eyes and just go into your body and just ask yourself, what am I feeling in my body? What sensation or sensations am I feeling in my body? And just pinpoint where it is. Is it your chest? Do you feel a tightness in your chest, or perhaps your shoulders? Or is your back really stiff? Or is there a heat, for example, temperature? A lot of people feel temperature. What are those sensations? And I want you to know that a lot of people actually feel a sense of numbness when they're afraid. They actually don't feel a lot of sensations. And I want you to know, if you're one of these people, if you close your eyes and you go in and actually you don't feel anything, I want you to know that numbness is actually a physiological response from many people to fear. So ask yourself, if you are numb, try to identify a place in your body that you're not numb, that you can kind of hold on to. And once you've identified either the sensation or sensations or the place where you're not numb, I want you to just be and sit with that sensation for 15 to 30 to 60 seconds. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to understand the sensation. You don't have to understand what the sensation is trying to tell you or anything at all. All you are doing is observing. You're being a witness to that sensation. But what that does is it allows the sensation or the energy in your nervous system to move around, to be released, to finish its cycle. And by doing that over time, and sometimes not that much time either, the coupling of the thoughts that are so scary and the emotions that are so overwhelming will decrease. So the next time you feel a sense of panic or fear, again, just commit to 30 seconds going inside, being an observer, being curious of those sensation or sensations, and allowing them to just be. Again, you don't have to do anything with them, but allowing them, which is the last thing most of us want to do. We resist, we want to run away. Even unconsciously, we try to get away from that. And we go into the mind or go into the emotions, which only precipitates the entire feedback loop, which is incredibly painful. But by going into the body, you will begin to decouple that experience and really, really minimize your fear to a degree that you cannot even imagine. So if anyone has any questions, please leave them in the comments. Please let me know. I want this video to have a lot of value. I'm happy to do many more videos on fear if I have an idea of what would be helpful. And I hope that you took home some great things today. More than anything, that you have a right to live without fear and to live a life free and open to new experiences, and a life that is not constricted and small by always being scared. And I want that for you. All right, take care.